we're going to completely shift gears here, and we're going to actually, since you're involved with Camplex, if you want to, you can hang out with us. Please.
And I kind of like Senator Enzi. He's a good guy.
Absolutely. And I want to welcome Senator Enzi to the show. Good morning, and thanks for stopping by.
Well, good morning. I thought I'd come by instead of call.
Well, and the way our phones are sometimes, I'm glad you stopped by instead of called. It's always better to have you here in person. Of course, you're here in town for the Affordable Energy Rally going on over at Camplex today. And this is such an important thing. Of course, these new regulations on carbon emissions are such a threat to the vital lifeblood of Wyoming and the country, for that matter. It really is important that we get out and make our voices heard about this. But absolutely,
or it'll cost a huge part of the Wyoming economy, and for nothing. I take pictures occasionally of the beautiful views all over Wyoming, and we have a real varying landscape. And most of the time, it's extremely clear. But I take pictures when there's haze out there, too. And then I track the haze down. And it's usually from forest fires, either west of us or in Canada. And that's where the real haze comes from, because we're not managing our forests properly. And it doesn't have a lot to do with coal and the energy business in Wyoming. And so we ought to be a little more concerned about that than trying to solve that problem by putting a lid on energy in the United States.
Well, and I'm sure we've all seen the haze from the forest fires. I mean, it pretty much the entire summer, especially if you went out a little bit further west in the state. There was a good bit of it. But again, that is from forest fires. It's not from coal-fired power plants. I mean, all anyone has to do is just drive by Dry Fork and just look. I mean, it's immaculate.
Mm-hmm. And we brought some key staffers from the Senate to Wyoming last month, so that they could see the mines, so they can see the air, so they can see how vast the country is out here. And that makes a huge difference. This was the third year of doing that. And one of the things that really pleased me is one of the key staffers from Washington State said he couldn't believe how clean it was out here and that there wasn't coal dust all over. That's one of the impressions they have out there, is that these trains will bring the coal out there and the coal dust will blow off and make their whole community black. I keep explaining to people that if you're selling a product, you don't want it to blow away, and so they make sure that it doesn't.
Well, and I think anybody here in Gillette could attest to that, and I think we're starting to get the word out that coal is such a vital part of the economy of not only this country but the world, and if we enact these regulations that the EPA wants. That's just going to throw a stick in the spokes of our economic growth. That coal will go somewhere. Yes. It'll end up in India. It'll end up in China, Australia, somewhere. And it interferes with our growth.
Yeah. Not only that, it's going to drive up the price of electricity in the United States. Right now, there are 21 states that get less than 10% of their energy from coal, and they're going to see at least a 26% increase in their energy prices. There are 29 states that get most of their energy from coal, and they pay 26% less than the national average. The national average, incidentally, is $110 a month, but that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that manufacturing relies on energy. And if we drive the prices of energy up, we drive the countries overseas. And that's the last thing we want to do. We want to be encouraging economic growth in the United States. And to do that, we've got to keep the energy prices down. There are a lot of myths out there on coal. In Washington, D.C., near what we call the cabin, which is where we live in Washington, D.C. I'd have had a cabin if I wasn't in Washington, D.C. 2 blocks from our house is a power plant, and that's the power plant that supplies the coal to the capital. So we have really good power there. There are relatively no outages. That's partly for security. But that's a coal-fired power plant. And the people around there discovered that it was a coal-fired power plant, so they've got these signs that say, "Get coal out of the capital." And they say that when it's burning natural gas, which it does not, the air is pure, our kids can breathe, and asthma isn't a problem. But when that's on coal, they said the ash comes down like snow. There hasn't been ash in the United States from coal-fired power plants for, I'll bet, 75 years.
Oh, well, and I know I've talked about this on the air before. I mean, my mother's entire side of the family was all coal miners from West Virginia. And even 50, 60 years ago, the coal-fired power plants weren't belching black smoke like you see in an old Dickens novel or something like that.
Absolutely. They've really cleaned them up, and we can do better, and we should do better. The University of Wyoming is doing a bunch of coal research, and the state legislature designated $10 million for coal research. What we're doing is denigrating the ingenuity of the American people. You give our kids a problem, they're able to solve it. And that's what we need to do with every source of energy. Figure out the problems with it and get it solved. When you start eliminating the use of a product, you start eliminating the number of people that are going to work on solutions for it. I made the first changes in mine safety in over 25 years. And one of the reasons that there weren't some of the tools that were needed is the amount of coal production went down for a long time. And people inventing things for coal safety quit doing that because they weren't going to make any money at it. Now that coal's on the rise again, there are a lot of things it was on the rise. There's been other things invented for it. Now that's shut down again. General Electric was going to do a major program in Wyoming looking at clean coal. And they said, well, with the president that we've got and the approach that he's taking to coal, we can't afford to do that. We may not be able to sell the products that we're able to come up with as a result of the research. So I hope they postponed it rather than canceled it, because that would be a big deal for Wyoming and the nation.
Well, and it's funny how it works out. It seems like the free market always comes up with these solutions. The EPA trying to force solutions on us prematurely. It's a recipe for disaster.
Right. And incentive works so much better. I think a couple of days ago, a payload was delivered to the space station by a private business. They're doing it for less than what the government can do it. And they're doing it more efficiently because they've invented some new ways of getting up into space. That was a challenge that was put out there. I remember a $1 million challenge they put out to see if somebody could bicycle power an airplane across the English Channel. And some people came up with a way to do that. Incentive works better than penalties, especially if they're government penalties. And so we've got to get away from the penalties and get back to incentive. We allocated a bunch of money for coal research, and it hasn't been used. DKRW, a company that wants to put a mine back to work in southern Wyoming and convert good Wyoming coal over to clean diesel, just wants a loan guarantee from that. They don't want a subsidy. They don't want a grant like a lot of the solar power and wind turbines got. They just want a loan guarantee so that in case the price of oil goes down, they'll still be able to come out on the expense they're going to put into this plant, because I think it's $2 or $3 billion that they have to do that. They've got sales for all of the product that they can produce, but they don't have a guarantee on the price. And that's all they're asking for from the federal government. And that money is not being allocated.
Well, now, of course, we're talking with Senator Enzi, and you're a lot closer, being in Washington much of the time. You're a lot closer to the pulse of these regulations than I think maybe a lot of people here are in Wyoming. I mean, what's the sense in the Senate? I mean, I know there is a good bit of bipartisan opposition to these regulations, isn't there?
There is if we got to vote on it.
Well, that's
Harry
the thing.
Reid's in complete control of what we get to vote on, and he's not bringing up anything unless the president approves it. And the president would prefer that it be a do-nothing Congress, and then he doesn't have to answer on any of the things that he's done. There would be some bipartisan reversals of a number of things that he's done if we got to vote on them.
Well, and I know I think the last time I talked with Senator Barrasso, we discussed this. The way Harry Reid does this, he has there's a rule in the Senate that only a certain number of bills can be considered at a certain time. They call it the amendment tree. And Senator Reid fills the amendment tree, and then that blocks votes on some of the things that could have bipartisan support, right?
That's exactly right. And first he brings up a bill that he knows has some flaws in it. And he knows that if the flaws aren't fixed, that the Republicans will stop it because it only takes 40 votes to stop it. And these always have an outstanding title to them that sounds like no American could be against. But if you read the bill, and our delegation reads the bills, I even read the Federal Register, and that's another thousands of pages. You find that there are these bad parts in there. I don't remember any bill that's passed without some amendments, and I don't remember any good bill that didn't come across bipartisan. And that's what we've gotten away from. We've gone to deal making and skipping the whole process and having an up or down vote without amendments. When I was committee chair for health, education, labor, and pensions, almost any bill that we brought up in committee had about 200 amendments, because that's the people that are intensely interested in that issue. And so they have a lot of ideas about what could be better and also what unintended consequences could be in it. And if you take a look at those, you can solve some problems before it ever goes to the floor. Then on the floor, there'd still be more amendments, because that's when the other people get to be involved in the issue. Right now, Americans are not being heard because their senators aren't being allowed to do amendments. In the last year, we've had 14 Republican amendments and 7 Democrat amendments. How does that compare? We used to do 750 amendments a year. So there's been a drastic reduction in being able to solve problems. And unless you can take care of those unintended consequences and represent your constituents, you don't let the bill go through, because it would be a disaster for America.
So I guess the obvious solution to that would be changing the makeup of the Senate in November, and things are starting to look, at least from what I've seen, things are starting to look pretty good on that front. And I don't want to dwell on the political side of things too much, but that seems like that's the only solution.
Well, I hope that people are taking a look at who's running for Senate and what their plans are, and realizing what difference it could make if there were a Republican majority, because we've promised to go back to where bad appointments can be blocked by just 40 votes, so that we don't get just fringe appointments all the time, and allowing amendments on the floor after a bill's been to committee. In other words, going back to the process that worked so well for over 200 years for America. And that's the only way to legislate. Having two people go off and figure out how to spend $1 2/10 trillion is not the right answer. You need to have everybody involved in it. You need to be able to look at it long enough to get down into the details of all of that spending. So there are a lot of changes that can be made, and we promised to make them.
And we should probably talk to our friends in Montana and Colorado who are also electing senators this term.
Absolutely, and South Dakota is another key state out this way. Those three would be half of the ones that we need to get to a Republican majority in the Senate.
Well, we can keep our fingers crossed. So of course, we're talking with Senator Enzi. You're going to be over at the Affordable Energy Rally today. Could you give us a little bit of a preview of what you're going to be discussing?
Well, I'm going to bring up a little bit of the importance of coal. You know, Wyoming's main revenue is energy. In fact, that's 75% of Wyoming's revenue. And coal, of course, is a big chunk of that. Not only do we get about $1.2 billion a year from taxes from it, there are also coal lease bonus payments that are made. And that's what we've been building our schools with. The legislature said now coal lease bonuses only come in when there's a new coal lease, so it's not a steady source of revenue. So we don't want to put it into a steady source of spending. That's good governing. And so they put it into building new schools. And I think we've built $2.6 billion worth of schools since 1992. And our kids are getting the benefit from that now. But it's also a lot of jobs in Wyoming. And we need to protect those jobs. It's about 25,000 jobs, and they're high-paying jobs. I think the average wage in the coal field is about $81,000 a month, and incidentally, that's women or men.
Well,
There are
and
a lot of jobs there that women can do in air-conditioned, no vibrating cabs but handling huge equipment. And it's a non-traditional job, but it's one that pays well, and there are people being trained for that right now.
Well, and it really is. It's such an important part of our economy, and even for the people that don't work directly for the energy industry, it supports every aspect of life here in Wyoming, because those people that work in the coal mines and the oil fields and they go to the restaurants, they go to the stores, they go to businesses that buy ads on radio stations. So even what I do is basically supported by the energy industry.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and in that the number of employees, I was just direct employees that we're talking about.
Oh yeah,
there are all these indirect ones that you're mentioning, and there are a whole bunch of contractors that work on these mines too that aren't considered direct. They're somehow considered indirect, and that's all wages that come, and it's contributed to Gillette's growth for sure. And we're now at a point, I think, where we've gotten enough population that we can diversify some, and we also can feed off of ourselves, because I think 30,000 is kind of that mass that you need in order to be able to survive and really grow, and we've hit that point now.
Oh yeah, well, and I think we're starting to see it as far as a lot of the growth in the city. I mean, we're starting to see more diversified businesses and more restaurants, more stores opening, and I think all of that makes for a healthy economy that's a little bit more stable than what I mean. You're from Gillette, so you know what it was like back in the boom and bust days, and I think we've finally moved past that point.
Well, that's another good reason why the coal companies were extremely important to Campbell County. When you build a power plant, it takes a couple thousand people to build it and 200 people to run it. With a coal mine, it takes a couple hundred people to build it and a lot more than that to run it, which helps to increase the population instead of doing that boom bust. But if we continue to denigrate coal and eliminate the use of coal, we're going to have some problems here in Campbell County, and we'll definitely notice it. Coal export can be a good source for additional jobs for our county, and that's why the governor and so many others of us are working to get those ports improved on the West Coast, and that's why that trip to Wyoming was so important by the Washington State staffer, to see that there aren't the kinds of problems that they've been envisioning as with coal coming through their state. Because if we can export that coal, I think right now Wyoming is exporting about 4.5 million tons of coal, and I think that's supporting over 100 jobs all by itself. And that's, again, just direct jobs, not the indirect jobs with the thing, and producing, again, more revenue for our state.
Oh, well, absolutely. And I know it's not really completely on topic, but I mean, how are the discussions going with, and I know, you're not involved on the state front, but is it looking like the Northwest states are starting to kind of see the light, so to speak, as far as shipping the coal out through their ports?
Well, the closer you are to where the actual port is, the more support there is. A myth can go around the world twice while the truth's tying its tennis shoes on. And there's just so many myths that we have to overcome with the people out there. They can't picture. They have a picture of what coal does, just like the people in Washington, D.C. have a picture of what they think coal does. Totally inaccurate and very hard to change their mind on it. So we just have to keep hammering away at it. And of course, this coal regulation this haze regulation that's coming up, it's extremely important that everybody write some letters on it and explain that we really don't have haze out here and we're not causing the haze, and that we're willing to put more money into coal research, and we do put more money into coal research, but that it's vital for families to have low-cost energy, and so we need to work at it to make sure we get the lowest cost energy we possibly can, and coal is the best source for that, and it's also the only stockpilable resource that we have for energy. So in times of crisis, if they have a lot of coal on hand and the railroads aren't able to operate, they can still run a coal-fired power plant. But if things happen to the pipelines, the other sources of energy have to shut down. So there are a lot of national security reasons that we need to make sure that we keep coal in operation.
Well, and of course, you can also run a coal-fired power plant on a day with no wind, which is always a plus. So, of course, and that's what this rally today over at Camplex is all about. The rally starts at 4. Senator Enzi will be speaking. Senator Barrasso will be there. Governor Meade and some representatives from, I believe, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce are going to be there. I believe the Wyoming Mining Association is going to have someone there. A lot of groups they're in on this together. And the information is going to be there. You can fill out a little card that can go directly to the EPA and let them know that this is something that's vital to our existence as not only Wyomingites, but as Americans. I mean, these regulations would be damaging to the entire country.
Absolutely, and. One of the things that I'm going to get to also do today, of course, is to go to 2 new school dedications. And again, that's because of the coal money that came from the coal lease bids. And if the nation stops using coal, and incidentally, they've shut down 77 power plants across the United States with regulations that already went into effect. And that cuts out the power for 15 million homes. At low cost.
Those are just amazing numbers, and if we don't speak up, this is the fate that will eventually hit all of the coal-fired power plants, and that'll be a disaster. I mean, I think the average cost just of this round of regulations, the average cost of the American people, I think it was $1,200 per year. Just on the electric bill, and that's not including the cost of goods going up as well. So it's definitely something that needs to be fought tooth and nail. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
we've got to get the whole nation involved in understanding what's going on with energy prices across the United States.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I want to thank you so much, Senator Enzi, for stopping by, and thanks for coming up to speak with us today at the rally as well. It's great to see our elected representatives all on the same page with this.
Well, we appreciate your help in getting the message out.
Well, we do our best.
It's critical to Wyoming. Thank you.
We do our best. There you go. It's Senator Enzi, and we're completely out of time. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp. Right now, though, stay tuned for Rush.
The #1 talk show in Northeast Wyoming. Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML.